Awesome. Thank you for coming here, but I wanted to make a quick comment. When you said that you can go into a hospital and they won't deny you, so what will usually happen is when you have no insurance, they will go in and they will stabilize you. You see this in a lot of cancer patients. They really don't treat the issue, and then you go back on the street, and usually you get to an ER and you continue to cycle until you die. Another thing you commented about was innovation.
Before we move on to that second point, I should like to point out that we have a robust social safety net for the elderly and the poor. And so one question would be why those people, if they can't afford insurance and they haven't been able to rectify their employment situation or whatever else is keeping it from them, aren't on the very robust and generous Medicaid systems in this country. As I will point out, I have a lot of friends who are actors. They refer to welfare programs as the federal arts subsidy. I am not joking about that. And a lot of them are able to use these welfare programs. A lot of us would consider that abuse. I don't begrudge it to them. I just pointed out to show how generous and how accessible our healthcare subsidies and safety net programs are.
So with that said, Mitch McConnell's already come out and said after the midterms that the Republicans are going to start looking to cut Social Security.
He said he's going to cut them or he's going to reform them?
Probably cut. He's got to make some cut. What reform in any political talk is cut.
If ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. Certainly we have to reform the entitlement programs because they're unsustainable and they are the driver of our debt and deficits. They'll bankrupt the entire country. We already have a very high debt to GDP ratio. This isn't going to be solved by taking a $100 tax refund out of middle class pockets. This is going to be solved by reforming these massive programs that have grown wildly out of control. And that's what adults are going to have to do if we're governed by adults. And that's the difference that is being shown to us in these elections, is there is one group of people who are saying that we're going to give everything away from free. And you say, well, Miss Ocasio-Cortez, where are you going to get that $40 trillion? And she says, well, you know, I'm not the expert on these things. You don't say, truer words have never been spoken. And then you have another group that says, look, things cost money and we're going to have to deal seriously with these programs. I think that the American people are smart, and I think that they're going to reward behaving like adults, especially as we have this childish idiocy at restaurants, at people's homes, in the streets. That's not how adults behave, and I think that fortunately we're headed toward a more adult politics.
So if you reform or cut those programs, you have more people who are uninsured. I just want to make that statement.
Excuse me,
so
repeat
unless
that?
You're fixing the issue of health care and you're just reforming these and cutting them off, people have paid into Social Security and Medicare, and one of the solutions is to raise the cap. So if you reform these and start putting people off, you just create a worse public health crisis.
When have we said that we're going to kick people off of Medicaid or Medicare? Show me that proposal from the conservatives.
You can just prevent people from getting it when they're 65. So now you have an elderly population that doesn't have any health insurance. Do you just say, hey, you have to work at McDonald's or work at Walmart?
To which proposal are you referring that will take Medicare away from 65-year-olds?
I'm not saying you will. You'll just say you'll stop preventing people.
You are. You're predicting
so
it,
you'll
my
say
friend. I'm telling you it's not going to happen.
Medicare right
what
now at this
what
moment,
happens if Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny both descend before our...
65, sorry, no Medicaid. So what do we do?
Well, I certainly won't elect you because you're going to take away my grandma's Medicare. So I'm not going to elect you. I don't like your proposal one little bit.
Medicare to everyone.
I'm sorry, what's your proposal?
I would love to expand it to everyone.
All right, and where are you going to get that $40 trillion?
You know what? For starters, I'd probably raise the income tax in the 1950s, since the Republicans love to say, oh, the golden age was.
What income tax rate do you propose? Because you'd have to double tax receipts annually to the government. So where are you going to get that money from?
From probably income tax and such.
All right. You show me when you make those numbers work. I'm a little skeptical that they're going to work, mostly because they don't work.
So in light of her interview yesterday in which she said that she will decide on a 2020 presidential run after the midterms, what are your thoughts on Hillary Clinton potentially running again, and what would your feelings be?
Please, Hillary, I know you're watching. I know you're watching, Hillary. Hillary, my third cousin once removed. That's a true story, by marriage. We don't talk about that at family reunions. Please, Hillary, run for re-election. By the way, she made a racially inappropriate joke during that very same thing. She said that all black people look alike. That was her before she even announced her 7,000th run for the presidency. Please do it. You know, being on the left means never having to say that you're sorry. Hillary, you go right ahead. You run against those deplorable, irredeemable, bitter, clinging, awful American people. I can't wait. We're going to win all 57 states that Barack Obama promised us.
So my question is about Kavanaugh. It's obvious that he lied under oath, and so I don't understand why it is good or moral or winning to support his confirmation. And to lay out the case that he lied under oath, there are several times that he lied under oath, but I think the easiest for me to explain is his recounting of Leland Kaiser's position on the alleged happenings.
Leland Kaiser,
right?
who said that she never met Brett Kavanaugh in her entire life, who Christine
Correct.
Ford said was at the party.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. So Brett Kavanaugh repeatedly said that she denied and refuted the
Correct.
allegations.
She did.
She did not.
She did.
She said she did not remember the event.
She
Her
said
pub-
she
no,
never
no,
met
no,
Brett
no, no.
Kavanaugh.
No. Her public,
She did. I'm
her-
sorry. I know this upsets
No.
you, but it's true. She never met Brett Kavanaugh.
That she said she did not remember the event. That is her public position.
Right. She also said she never met Brett Kavanaugh, and you're neglecting that very important detail.
You're neglecting the fact that he said she denied the
Right.
event
She did. She
happened.
refuted it, and I just told you how she refuted it. She said she never met Brett Kavanaugh.
She said
And
she
facts
did,
don't care about your feelings. To quote a friend of mine from Los Angeles.
Her public position is that she does not remember the event happening. The absence of remembering an event is different than remembering the absence of an event. Kavanaugh said, and that's important. Kavanaugh is a judge; he would know that. That would be
Right.
pertinent.
She didn't.
And if I
She
say
didn't
I
refute.
don't-
Excuse me. She didn't refute what he said, or rather, she didn't refute the testimony there. Her refutation of the testimony is she said she never met Brett Kavanaugh. That's the refutation.
That's different than saying the event. She denied the event happened.
I know you're explaining one thing she said, and I'm pointing out another thing that she said, which refutes what Christine Ford said.
Right. Well, it's inaccurate to say that she.
It is accurate.
denied
He spoke
the
exactly
accusation.
accurately. He also likes beer. He also still likes beer. I can't find a single lie that he said, and I still like beer too.
That's all I need to know.
So I'm going to start off my question with a quote from Ben Bernanke. He's the economist at Brookings Institute and was the 14th chairman of the Federal Reserve. He was nominated by George W. Bush. His quote starts off, "Our willingness to trade freely with the world is indeed an essential source of prosperity." And he continued to say that any effort to restrict trade is exactly the wrong thing to do. I'd like to ask, how can anyone call the Republican Party the party of facts over feelings when they reject their own experts?
In what way have we rejected our experts? You've just extolled the virtue of free trade. Where are we seeing free trade around the world? Are we seeing free trade around the world while China blatantly violates World Trade Organization treaties? Are we seeing free trade while China subsidizes illegally its steel and aluminum industries? Are we seeing free trade while China steals our intellectual property as a fact of doing business over there? I don't think that's free trade at all. Are we seeing free trade while China plants spyware in our technology that has infiltrated our corporate structures and our government? I don't think that's free trade at all. We all want free trade. The President of the United States said, we want free trade. We want to bring tariffs to zero if we can. But we're not going to allow ourselves to be abused by the rest of the world, by our enemies and our opponents, or by our allies or our friends, particularly our friends whose militaries we pay for, whose defense we pay for. We need it to be fair. If we're imagining some sort of free trade regime that has allegedly existed for the last decade, I think we're speaking in fictions. So I think it's absolutely right. I want to be able to trade freely all around the world so long as it doesn't pose a national security interest. But we've got to get our heads out of the sand and stop pretending that that's what we've got. And we've got to hold the leaders of other countries accountable, and that way we can all prosper.
Hey, I heard you mention a lot of things about socialism.
Yes.
So I'm for more of a mixed economy, and I am for Medicare for all. I believe.
Doesn't that seems awful? It seems like you want to become an old person. Why do you want to become an old person?
No,
why do you want to use old ideas like socialism?
No, that's giving everyone the right to health care, health insurance. And right now, our current system, we have 600,000 bankruptcies. People file for bankruptcy under our current system. Our current system is not cost effective. It cost,
I agree.
what was it, $33 trillion over a 10-year period from right now. And a recent study by the Mercatus Center actually found that the Medicare for All system in the Senate would save $2.1 trillion over a 10-year period from 2022 to 2031 So why can't you get behind that?
Well, when we were talking about the costs of these systems, one has to be very careful. I was promised certain costs for Obamacare, and there was a lot of fuzzy math because the taxes kicked in early and the benefits didn't kick in quite so early. So the question is twofold. One, you're asking economically, you're saying that the current healthcare regime is not efficient, and therefore the socialist regime would be more efficient. That may actually be the case. That's not an argument for socialism, though. That's an argument for liberalization. That's for liberalizing the markets, making prices much more apparent to both the consumers and the service providers, to opening up what are now virtual monopolies for health insurance companies. And fortunately, by the way, this administration, it has around the edges worked on all of those things. There is also a moral argument as well, which is that people ought to be free, man ought to be free, and if healthcare is going to have to be rationed, I would rather it be rationed by me and my freedom of choice than by some bureaucratic board somewhere in the federal government. We see, you know, to take, forgetting all of the other problems of socialist healthcare, let's look at the example of little Charlie Gard in the United Kingdom, where
That's anecdotal.
Well, that anecdote has happened several times over the last few years, but it illustrates my point,
Tens
which is
of thousands of people die every year in the U.S. because they lack health insurance.
Sure, sure. I think many people around the world have died and been waiting on lines in socialist and communist regimes. So I don't think it's good to compare those numbers. The point that I will make, however, is that in countries, even mixed economies, even countries with relatively free socialist healthcare regimes, the government has the final say on what you can do, how you can treat yourself, how you can treat your children. When the Pope, when the head of the Catholic Church says, I will invite this baby into my country to receive health care, and the government has the right to say, absolutely not, we control your child. That's horrifically immoral, and we cannot allow that to happen here. Because, by the way, I'll also point out, when we speak about the efficiency of socialist healthcare regimes around the world, all of those regimes rely on the innovativeness of the American healthcare system, which leads the world and always has. It's true. You're shaking your head, but it's true. And so if the United States stops leading the way in healthcare, you're going to see that affect global markets and global healthcare regimes all around the world, and it'll be a very bad thing. And that is the reason that people, when they actually want care, living in Cuba, living in Canada, living in the United States, when even their private insurance that they're forced to buy doesn't cover, that's why they come to the United States, because we're the leaders.
We already ration care by the size of our wallets.
We ought to ration care by the size of our
We
wallets?
already ration our care by the size of our
Of course we don't.
wallets.
We have a robust social safety net. We have Medicare and Medicaid. We have a very generous social safety net, and nobody dies. I mean, it's one of the most absurd lies of people pushing socialist healthcare that people are dying in the streets. That's absurd. Anybody can walk into an emergency room. Nobody is dying in the streets in the United States and hasn't in the modern era.
Tens of thousands of people are dying in the U.S.
You
because
can
they have
keep
health
repeating
insurance.
your
I'm
lie,
just
but
saying.
it doesn't make it true. Show
And
me
you
the
can do your
person who is
anecdote- you can do your
denied
anecdotal
entrance to an
stuff.
emergency room, my friend. Show me the person. I haven't seen them.
Hey, I'm for facts over feelings.
You can repeat good slogans as well as bad slogans, but they remain slogans nonetheless. And I'm explaining to you
I thought
the
your
way the
boss came
healthcare
up with
regime
that.
actually works.
Okay.
The left and the right see anti-Semitism as two very different things. And I'm not even sure it's a left-right divide. I think that it's a correctly understanding anti-Semitism versus not correctly understanding anti-Semitism divide. Here are the two ways of seeing anti-Semitism. One, anti-Semitism is a unique evil in world history. It is not like any other form of bigotry. Anti-Semitism is based on a generalized conspiracy theory whereby anything that happens in the world that is bad is the responsibility of the Jews. So, if you are a capitalist and you don't like the communists, it's because the communists are Jews that you really have a problem. And if you're a communist and you don't like the capitalists, the real problem is Goldman Sachs and all those Jews who are at the top of the heap. And if you are an internationalist and you don't like nationalism, well, it's those evil Jews in Israel who are responsible for the breakdown in the global order. And if you're a nationalist who doesn't like internationalism, it's the globalist cuck Jews who are responsible for everything in the world. In other words, anti-Semitism is a solution to every problem for the conspiracy-minded person. The Jews are responsible for everything. Anti-Semitism is based on the idea that there's this powerful, nefarious group that is running things, undermining your society. And that is why anti-Semitism is so chameleonic. It's so changeable. Right? Racism against black folks has basically taken one form in the United States, saying that black folks are inferior. Right? That's really what racism in the United States has been about against black folks. And it's evil. It's evil. But a conspiracy theory about folks running the world is a different sort of evil than an evil that says that people are genetically inferior, and not the same thing. So theory number one is that anti-Semitism is a unique evil in world history where you attribute everything bad happening in the universe to the Jews. And in essence, anti-Semitism is sort of an anti-God position, because if you're a God-based person, what you believe is that the world is the way that God made it, and the Jews are not responsible for the world the way that God made it. If you are anti-God, then you say, okay, the group, I have to look for some nefarious force behind world events. That will be the Jews. And this is the thread that holds true whether you're talking about Christian anti-Semitism during the Crusades. It's the Jews who are undermining our society because they killed Christ. Or whether you're talking about Islamic anti-Semitism today, it's the Jews who are behind the state of Israel and who are the sons of dogs and pigs and monkeys, and they're manipulating world events against us. It's behind Nazi anti-Semitism and communist anti-Semitism, this generalized conspiracy theory. And it gets violent, because if you believe the Jews have power, then that means the Jews must be stopped. That's what drove this white supremacist in Pittsburgh. Right? If you look at his feed, it was all about the Jews have too much power, the Jews must be stopped. So anti-Semitism is a difference in kind, not just a difference in degree. And the second theory of anti-Semitism is that all anti-Semitism is just basically a small version of generalized bigotry. Bigotry comes in all forms. Anti-Semitism is just bigotry against Jews. That's sort of the perspective that Barack Obama was pushing in the aftermath of the shooting in Pittsburgh. He said, we grieve for the Americans murdered in Pittsburgh. All of us have to fight the rise of anti-Semitism and hateful rhetoric against those who look, love, or pray differently. Okay, so the idea is here that anti-Semitism is just another iteration of intersectional racism. That basically there's this dominant society that hates minority groups. Jews are a minority group, and that's why the dominant society hates them. The first version of anti-Semitism suggests that America is a success story, because America is the most tolerant country for Jews in history, in world history, except for the state of Israel itself. It is the most tolerant country for Jews ever, right? So that means that America is a success story specifically because America does not see this grave ill that is plaguing the world as the Jews or anything like that. That speaks to America's bastion of liberty. The version of anti-Semitism as a sort of subset of generalized bigotry, that version of anti-Semitism, that really suggests that America is a bad place, because even if the United States is different, it's only different because the Jews are white. The reason that anti-Semitism isn't bad in the United States is because Jews are more powerful and they are higher on the intersectional hierarchy of power than other groups. Now, what this leads to on the left is a belief that anti-Semitism is actually less important than other forms of bigotry, specifically because the left sees all bigotry as rooted in hierarchies of power. So if Jews are powerful, if Jews are rich, if Jews are tolerated in the United States, that means anti-Semitism is less important than other forms of bigotry. And that means that you can attribute Jewish success not to freedom, not to the good of the United States, not to the good of the world. Instead, you can attribute lack of anti-Semitism to Jews gaining power themselves, because Jews can actually be outstripped in the intersectional hierarchy by other forms of racism. And so the intersectional version of what anti-Semitism is actually can lead to more anti-Semitism, because what it suggests is if the Jews escape anti-Semitism, if the Jews succeed in Israel, if the Jews succeed in the United States, that is an effect of them climbing that intersectional power hierarchy and thus leaving behind their membership in the group victimhood clan, right? In the group victimhood clique. And this is why the left-wing version of anti-Semitism is not only wrong, it is actually counterproductive and leads to more anti-Semitism and has been mainstreamed into the Democratic Party today. It's actually a grave, grave problem. Understanding anti-Semitism is the key to fighting it, and I fear that a lot of folks don't actually understand what anti-Semitism is, or if they do, they're ignoring it.